Bond. James Bond. Hi, this is Robert Darby, and you're listening to Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. Stay tuned.
We know that the James Bond series popularized pre-title sequences, but when did the use of pre-title sequences begin? Hi, this is Dan.
And Tom.
Of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our podcast show, Cracking the Code of Spy Movies. So that's our pre-title. Let's go see how this all started. James Bond didn't invent pre-title sequences, but popularized and standardized it for mainstream cinema. Before From Russia with Love made it a signature, in 1963, there were a number of movies that experimented with narrative scenes before opening credits, though often for stylistic, tonal, or technical reasons rather than as a recurring formula.
Okay, Dan, we should probably make sure we define the term pre-title sequence. We've used it a couple times already today.
Yeah.
Pre-title sequence is the scene or scenes that appear before the movie's opening credits or the main title card. They're sometimes called a cold open, teasers, or prologues as well. So you might see all of those terms used for what we're talking about here. And the goal of these things is they're designed to grab the audience immediately, delivering intrigue, tension, or action before the formal story begins.
Yeah. I mean, in the golden age of Hollywood, and by the way, I think they stopped making movies in Hollywood like in 1911. Because they made them in all the other suburbs of the Burbank and everything else. Anyway, in the golden age of Hollywood, most movies started with credits first, often set over music and visual backdrops. In the earliest decades of filmmaking, opening titles were purely functional. They introduced the movie's name, importantly, the studio, and the cast. Movies typically began with a title card and music before any story unfolded.
Yeah, the studios needed their names out there, right?
Oh, yeah.
And there was no concept here yet of hooking the viewer before the titles. It was just like, okay, here's the titles.
Right.
Movies typically, except for Fritz Lang's, were typically shorter than what we have today, and grabbing attention wasn't quite a problem yet.
Yeah, I mean, here's three quick examples of movies that started with a title card, right? The Great Train Robbery in 1903, which opens directly with the title. Metropolis, 1927, begins with long credits before the story starts. Secret Agent, a Hitchcock movie, a great one, 1936, spy movie. This opens with titles, but against the backdrop of silhouettes of soldiers that change as the title card changes.
Wait, you mean Secret Agent is a spy movie? What a concept.
Yeah, one of the early ones.
Good name
and
for
a great one. A narrative before credits was rare, but a few filmmakers did indeed experiment with it long before Bond, James Bond. In general, for example, film noir occasionally began in medias res, that's what they called it, in the middle of the action, setting a dark tone before any text appeared. Film noir in the 1940s really cemented the pre-title or cold open as a storytelling tool, which is a very different tool for relating the story or part of it. Many noir movies started with a flashback frame or a scene of danger before the titles. So making it a more common approach, though not yet a widespread one.
So the concept here was to create interest and an instant mystery that intrigued the audience and packed some emotional punch with a feeling of urgency.
See, I like the mystery part, right?
Like I want to see what's going to happen.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of these times, these cold openings frame the movie as something dark. We know that danger lurked and that piqued interest. So these film noir offerings of the 1940s were in the pioneering stage of the pre-title concept. They were flushing it out here. And they used a confession or a flashback that drew the audience in. How did we get to the point that we see in this flashback? And this all happens before the titles rolled.
Yeah, I mean, here's a few more film noir titles, primarily from the 1930s to the 1950s, that used a pre-title or cold opening, again, long before James Bond. And here's a few from spy movies. The 39 Steps, 1935, starts directly in the middle of a music hall sequence before the credits. Alfred Hitchcock was always pushing the media to do more. And this one, a great entry into the spy world, by the way, is magnificent. We just did a podcast on the 10 things you missed in the 39 Steps, so check that one out. And then Foreign Correspondent, another Hitchcock movie, 1940, also opens quickly before its main title card.
Right, Dan. And don't forget, we've got another Hitchcock one, The Man Who Knew Too Much. And I'm
Oh,
talking
yeah.
the original, the 1934 edition of this thing. It starts with a hand perusing travel pamphlets about Switzerland. So it doesn't do a lot to enhance the story, but it does set the location for us. And then the titles open.
Yeah. And we got a lot of other non spy movies employing these pre title techniques. And like here, Double Indemnity, 1944, a Billy Wilder movie. He directed this. This is a good movie.
It is a
It's
good
got
one.
it has a cold opening. A wounded man begins dictating his confession before the titles. This guy, Walter Neff, staggers into his insurance office, bleeding, and begins dictating his confession before any titles appear. Why it matters? One of the first major noirs to use the in media res concept, the confession before the title, immediately grabbing viewers. It is hugely influential. And then you got The Killers, 1946. Another cold open. The two hitmen arrive at a small town diner and murder the Swede. The titles roll afterwards. And again, this matters because perhaps the most suspenseful noir opening, a pure cold open that sets up the story's mystery before the credits, kind of grabs you and
It
brings you
really
in.
It really does. And we're going to jump into Bond a little bit later, but it's interesting to juxtapose this to what happened in From Russia with Love, right?
Yeah.
Because you've got a murder that happens in From Russia with Love. And
Hmm.
so it sets it all up, but it's a kind of a similar concept, if you will, of setting up the movie in the way the pre-title goes.
Yeah. You got Sunset Boulevard 1950. You got D.O.A. 1950, which was another good one. The D.O.A. one is cool because it has another cold opening. The poisoned protagonist walks into a police station to report his own murder before the credits. That's pretty cool. The definition of a hook opening. This is it.
Yeah.
The audience is locked in
Yeah.
before the story even begins.
I've been murdered. Wait. How did you get
Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and then if we go, I mentioned Fritz Lang earlier, right?
Yeah.
His movie The Big Heat from 1953. There's a guy who writes a suicide note and then he kills himself, and that's the cold open. The
Yeah.
titles appear after that. So it gives us immediate tension, sets the noir tone of corruption and tragedy.
Yeah. I mean, you got all these cool ones. You got another one, 1950, The Asphalt Jungle, which was a terrific movie. You got another one a year earlier, 1949, Crisscross. That's another great one. Out of the Past, 1947. The Narrow Margin, 1952. That's a good one. Detectives travel to pick up a witness, a quick, tense setup before credits even roll. And again, a fast-paced cold open in a confined, suspense-driven noir environment. Pretty cool.
That
And then you
really
got,
is. And then, one other that I kind of like here is the movie Gun Crazy from
oh
19.
yeah, yeah,
In the cold open in that one, a boy steals a gun and is caught. And this again happens before the credits. So
yeah,
this one establishes obsession and gives us character psychology before the story even begins.
yeah. So they experimented with a lot of different twists on this concept. So the idea of an established, expected pre-credits mini story didn't really exist yet. So film noir sets us up for the James Bond pre-title sequences to follow. Film noir established the in media res, the start and the middle concept, that technique, moral ambiguity, and flashback framing. It started all of that. It's really cool to know. James Bond movies,
You really like that in media res term, don't you?
well, because it describes exactly what it is. If you look it up and figure out what the hell it means. All right, James Bond movies borrowed from this. The hooks first, credits second kind of flow, but ingeniously and creatively, they swap moral tension for action spectacle, which always hook the audience in James Bond movies. And we always love that in the James Bond movies. Ah,
And the other thing with the James Bond movies is sometimes these pre-title sequences set us up for what's going to happen in the movie. And sometimes it's just kind of like, where'd you come up with that idea?
or they're separate stories, like, Goldfinger is a whole
Goldfinger.
separate story. Yeah,
Yeah, exactly. So
right.
it's interesting how they kind of morphed how they can be used.
Yeah. But if you go look back at these film noir cold opens, and you look at Double Indemnity, The Killers, D.O.A., and The Big Heat, all of which we mentioned, Those are all prototypes for the Bond mini mission structure. That's pretty cool to know how this got all set up for Bond. But besides the noir genre of movies, there were many other movies that experimented with the concept of a pre-title sequence before Bond. We know From Russia with Love was the first Bond movie with a pre-title, but it created a formula for the series and the franchise for the first time in cinema history. Here are a few more movies that employed the pre-titled concept before Bond. These are not spy movies, but give us the basis for what Bond was to do and where this all came from. And these that we will list here presented early scene first sequences that were very short, yet established the tone of the movie before the titles roll.
Yeah, and I think we should start with what I'm calling the first pre-title sequence. It's the first one that I know of from in a talking movie. And that
Okay.
was the 1930s movie Viennese Nights. Now, this was an all-talking operetta. That concept was new at the time. And it opens with a shot of a beer garden where people are eating and drinking. It's an extremely short scene. And there's a performance at the front of the beer garden that we get to hear and see. So we get the setting that there's music here. We hear that there's going to be singing and that we've got this jovial start to this movie. And it kind of sets us in Vienna. So the nice thing about this is it's very short, but it sets the stage for the movie. And it's, again, the first pre-title sequence that I know of. And it was also one of the first operettas made specifically for motion pictures. So this thing, it's really short, but it really sets that, hey, we're going to see something different than we've historically seen in movies.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And some of the other 1930s movies that with pre-title sequences include The Public Enemy, fantastic movie, 1931. This one opens with a brief written forward about bootlegging and crime before the main credits, then dives straight into a flashback scene. And then Frankenstein, 1931, begins with a graveyard scene before any main titles, a direct atmospheric opening. King Kong, 1933, opens directly with a short shipboard setup before the credits roll.
Okay, so that's the 30s. So let's look at the 40s. And we've got to look at Citizen Kane, of course,
Yeah.
right? 1941. We get the no trespassing gate at the opening. We've got Kane's death. We get the word Rosebud, all before this main title card. So many consider Citizen Kane the best movie ever made, and it starts with an intriguing pre-title.
Yeah.
Now, Dan, probably one of your favorite movies is Casablanca.
Yeah, it might be my favorite movie. Yes.
And this one opens a little different. There's a globe spinning montage and a narration before the credits appear. Again, this thing is short. The concept is there, giving us a hint of the scope of the movie.
Yeah, this is perhaps my favorite movie ever. And really, I want to do an episode on it because I really think it's a spy movie. So I think we should do one on Casablanca. It's terrific.
Well, we could do that.
Yeah. All right, let's move into the 1950s. Sunset Boulevard, 1950, opens with the image of a man floating dead in a swimming pool, narrating from beyond the grave before the title sequence. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. We all remember that one. It's a great one, 1956. It opens with Miles Bennell in distress in a hospital before cutting to the credits. And then, hey, we got a couple more Hitchcock movies, Tom. North by Northwest in 1959 and Psycho. North by Northwest, although the credits appear quickly, the narrative setup, Cary Grant being mistaken for another man, begins right after, blending the titles into the action, a clear proto-Bond rhythm kind of thing. And then Psycho, of course, 1960. Paul Bass's credit design dominates the start. The narrative hook, the Phoenix Hotel scene, begins almost instantly after the brief main titles. Very much a cold opening pace kind of thing. Though we do see the titles first here, but it's close.
That one to me is not a pre-title sequence because it isn't pre-title.
It's pretty close.
I guess
All right.
what happens after the titles is not a all right.
How could you not mention that? All right, let's move on to 1960, Tom. Pre-Bond, but close.
Bond started in 62, so there's not a lot of time for that. But we've got three examples that we can talk about here. And the first one is The Magnificent Seven, another one of your favorite movies.
Yeah, fantastic.
That one is from 1960, and it opens with a short narrative beat involving undertakers and gunslingers before the credits. So it's a nice, quick little setup there.
Mm.
And of course, we get West Side Story from 1961. We get the entire aerial city sequence building the mood before the stylized title gets revealed. So it kind of starts to set the stage with the way they're showing the city here.
And speaking of West Side Story, I mean, we spoke with Joe Karoff, who just recently passed away, unfortunately, about his graphic design work. Like he created the 007 logo, for instance, and he also did the artwork for West Side Story posters and the creative. So, and lots of other movies
A
too. So,
lot more.
yeah, you should check out that podcast episode. It's terrific. And then Tom, one of your favorites.
The Guns of Navarone, 1961. This one starts with a naval action scene before the title. So it's a clear influence on later war and spy movie openings. It's another good one, and it really is a spy movie. And so
Yes.
this is really shortly before the Bond series starts.
Yeah. So before From Russia with Love, 1963, the pre-title sequences existed, but they were occasional stylistic choices, not a consistent formula. Most served narrative or tonal setups rather than a separate mini mission or a self-contained action beat or story. And the film noir and thrillers used them most effectively, again, Double Indemnity, The Killers, and so on, because they did set up the what would be happening in the movie for us. Again, like many of the James Bond pre-titles. It was the James Bond series, though, that took this storytelling device and made it a distinct, expected structure, combining a self-contained action hook, a quip, and a direct transition into the theme song and credits for the movie to follow. That's what James Bond contributed to this. Still, the idea of an established, expected pre-credit mini-story didn't exist, really, before the James Bond series and EM production did.
So you're talking about what Ian Productions did with this when you say that From Russia with Love was the first one that had a pre-title sequence. So what's the pre-title sequence in Dr. No?
Well, there isn't one in Dr. No, as we know, which is why I said that From Russia with Love was the first James Bond movie with pre-title sequence. That's the way it was.
Well, but wait a minute. What about the gun barrel sequence? That's pre-title.
Yeah, now, the gun barrel sequence is more of a signature logo that leads to the pre-title sequence, like in From Russia with Love. And onward,
But
in itself, it tells no story.
Yeah, but in Dr. No, well, it kind of does tell a little story that you've got, here's an agent that's going to shoot, right? He's licensed to shoot. Now, the gun barrel sequence is before the titles in almost every James Bond movie up until Daniel Craig ruined the series. It isn't a story like the post gun barrel sequences that, like you're talking about, but it isn't far off from some of the early movies we just talked about that had very short pre-titles.
Yeah.
Now, I also want to point out that we can recognize the impact that an earlier movie or movies may have had on the gun barrel pre-title sequence. And I'm talking about the 1934 movie Crime Without Passion, which stars one of your favorite actors, Claude Rains.
Right.
Now, this movie opens up with actor credits, and then we get a narrative screen that says, "Three sisters of evil who lie in wait for those who live dangerously and without gods." So now, this isn't really telling us the upcoming story per se, but it does set up that something ominous is coming in the movie with people acting badly. And it uses the three Furies from Greek mythology as the three sisters. It's a very stylistic piece, and it's also very famous. And just this opening has been released as a 3-minute short that you can find on YouTube. And I guess most fans of old movies will have seen this opener, if not the movie.
What does this have to do with the gun barrel sequence?
Okay. Well, okay, sorry.
I don't get it.
Sorry. All right. If you watch this, behind that text that I just read to you, we see an eyeball, and then we look down the barrel of a gun, then back to the eyeball, back to the gun fires, and we see drops of blood from the three Furies appear. Then we get the title card.
All right. I see where you're coming from there. All right. We have a gun pointing at us, firing, and then we see blood. Okay. It is obviously very different than the James Bond gun barrel sequence, but I get what you're saying there, Tom. Okay.
Yeah. Now let's also add an influence here from the 1903 movie, The Great Train Robbery.
Yeah.
At the end of that one, a bandit fires directly at the camera, and you can see the genesis of the James Bond gun barrel, especially if you merge these two scenes from these two
Yeah.
movies.
I like that. All right. So the spy era and James Bond revolution in the 1960s is on us. The modern pre-title sequence truly became famous, well-known, and importantly expected thanks to the James Bond series. So starting with From Russia with Love, 1963, the second Bond movie, the franchise made the pre-title a signature element. A self-contained teaser scene before the credits, often unrelated to the main plot, but showcasing Bond's skills, action, or wit, and immediately followed by the elaborate title sequence and theme song, a hallmark of the James Bond series.
Yeah, now
That's good stuff.
let me jump in here because you just said often unrelated to the main plot. At the beginning, I would agree with you, but as the series rolled on, they became making it really the start of the movie, setting up what's happening the rest of the movie. Not always the case in the earlier Bond movies.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah. All right. The writers, Richard Maybaum and Johanna Harwood, obviously knew about pre-titles or cold starts. They updated Bond by creating one for From Russia with Love because, in general, early 1960s audiences were used to slower narrative kind of openings. The pre-title sequence here in From Russia with Love made James Bond feel modern, thrilling, cinematic, and, like I said, updated. This really set the tone. It grabbed the audience's attention immediately, and it created a signature Bond formula. And it was an obvious hit.
Well, and besides it being a hit, it was the first time in the James Bond movies that we saw James Bond get killed.
Yeah, right. Then you get Goldfinger, 1964. That perfected the formula. A short mission, an explosion, a quip, shocking, positively shocking. Then the theme song. And Goldfinger, of course, set the parameters and formula for all Bond movies to come. And after that, the Bond pre-title became iconic. A mini movie to set the tone, the style, and the excitement to follow. Great stuff.
And I've seen Raymond Benson talk about this pre-title sequence, and he says it's the best one of any movie, not just James Bond movies.
Wow.
So these James Bond pre-title sequences, the gun barrel, and this whole mini story concept take the pre-title concept to a new level. And the mini story is used by many movies. In fact, most movies of the modern era employ this concept.
Yeah, I mean, after James Bond, the concept spread widely to other genres, 1970s, 80s, and onward. So Bond had a major impact on this concept.
You mean this franchise that was so successful, other producers, screenwriters, and filmmakers noticed how well they worked? What a concept. I mean,
Yeah.
the audiences,
Wow.
the audiences loved it. And so
Yeah.
we even saw we started talking about film noir, but then we can get into action, horror, and thriller films as well. Take Jaws. The shark attack happens before the main title. In Star Wars, the A Long Time Ago crawl functions as kind of a world building pre-title moment.
Yeah, that's true.
Even Raiders of the Lost Ark, Indy's opening cave adventure feels straight out of the Bond playbook.
Yeah.
And that's on the movie screen. On television, this evolved into the cold open structure used in everything from Mission Impossible to the X-Files and even Breaking Bad.
Yeah. And you look at the 1990s onward to today. I mean, gee, movies are still doing this.
Well, they are because they were common in big budget action spy movies. Audience members liked it. The writers liked it because it let them set the stage. So we had GoldenEye, Casino Royale, and Skyfall. Each of those movies used their pre-title sequences to define a new James Bond era.
Yeah.
And Scream in 1996 revived the idea in horror, right? So taking a horror film and adding the pre-title sequence to it. So it shocks the audience before the titles even rolled. I mean, even The Dark Knight opens with Joker's bank heist. I mean, it's pure pre-title intensity.
Yeah. So even though James Bond didn't invent the pre-title sequence, let's look at how James Bond pre-title sequences changed storytelling in movies forever. All right. The hook. not Felix Leiter's Hook, by the way. But hey, check out Raymond Benson's book, the new book, the Hook in the Eye. It's all about Felix Leiter.
Yep.
Fantastic book. But the hook here, as it became the signature story hook, started here with From Russia with Love. So let's look at that. EM Productions' first true pre-title sequence for a James Bond movie, From Russia with Love, is here. The movie opens with a tense chase where Bond is pursued and stalked by an unknown and then is seemingly killed, only for it to be revealed as a training exercise with a masked double looking like James Bond.
So we get the first fake James Bond death. It was a fake out to the audience because you didn't know what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll see more of this throughout the series.
Yeah. All right. You also have the storytelling purpose for the pre-title. It shocks the audience, it creates mystery and intrigue, and sets up Spectre's ruthlessness as part of their immediate intent. So this is pretty cool.
Well,
and
and
I
like your use of the word shocking the audience here, because you come in to see the second James Bond movie and he dies in the first 30 seconds or whatever.
He's dead. Yeah. All right. From Russia with Love was the shortest pre-title sequence of any Bond movie, though Casino Royale 2006 was only about 11 seconds longer, actually. So, and then let's look at the widespread influence that James Bond had. It established and popularized the idea of this self-contained, gripping, tense scene to pull audiences in, to hook us, all before the big story even began. This is cinema brilliance.
And it's not just cinema. We talked a second ago about some of the shows that it influenced on TV because it's that good of an idea. It didn't begin with James Bond, but this first pre-title sequence in the James Bond movie is magnificent, and it influences the series, future movies, and TV like no other.
Yeah, absolutely. The mini movie before the movie became a new expectation for action and spy genres. Audiences loved it and expected it and reacted to it. All good. So, how else did James Bond's pre-title influence the industry, Tom?
Well, first, it defines Bond's character through action, which was a really clever way of developing his character here. So if you look at Goldfinger, he starts his pre-title mission in a wetsuit. He emerges from the water. He blows up the drug facility. And then he's got this tuxedo that was on underneath his wetsuit. And he heads to a bar to meet a woman for some unfinished business and delivers us a quip. Shocking, positively shocking.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's all wrapped up in this little story that we get before the movie starts. And the storytelling purpose or impact of this? Well, it reestablishes for us Bond's skills. It enhances our view of his charm and his humor, and that there's danger in Bond movies, all in about 3 minutes. So it's a brilliant use of screen time. And importantly, it's showing us, not telling us, what James Bond is really like.
That's the important part. And that's the brilliance of this pre-title as Bond did it. And it had a lot of influence. Other movies and franchises adopted this because it really is character development shorthand. It's all done in a few minutes. If we look at movies like Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom, 1984, we see it begins with Indy outsmarting gangsters, at least for a while. A pure Bond-style introduction to his character. Remember, Temple of Doom was actually a prequel to Raiders of the Lost Ark. Even The Dark Knight, 2008, similarly uses the Joker's heist, basically a mini-story being told to define both the character and the tone before the titles roll. So, more Bond influence, for sure.
Yeah, now all James Bond movies to come are going to have to be prequels.
Yeah, right. We'll talk to Amazon. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. Well, character continuity was really important, and the pre-title sequences always help define and redefine who James Bond is. And that narrative was pretty consistent from movie to movie. If you think about the redefining, it was a great way to introduce the new James Bond actor as the series progressed.
Yeah. Well, I like that concept because it is constantly adding to our knowledge of what James Bond is, who James Bond is, and how he acts, what we can anticipate him doing. I think that's when something is well written, when you can anticipate what the character will do in a situation. That's a well written story or a well written screenplay. So, for instance, we jump ahead to The Spy Who Loved Me, 1977. You see Bond escape assassins on skis, then he parachutes off a cliff in one of the best stunts ever performed.
Absolutely.
Rick Sylvester. And when this parachute opened, it was basically a huge British flag, all right, the Union Jack. And the audience went nuts. Again, this is James Bond showing us he is bigger than life, and it all happens in the pre-title. It's good. And what's the storytelling purpose here? His mission is interrupted as he is being called back to MI6 for an even more important mission, showing us that Bond is the best. MI6 wants Bond for this mission that could impact the entire world. All in the pre-title we're getting this. It's fantastic. And again, influence. The idea of a reset opening, a mini adventure unrelated to the main plot, became standard in franchises. It could be related, could be unrelated, but it became standard in franchises. We saw that first in Goldfinger with Bond on an unrelated mission in the pre-title.
Well, wait, you could argue there's a callback here to Dr. No, but I get what you're saying. It's
there's definitely a callback to Dr. No.
It's kind of barely there, but it is there.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think you could argue that. But heck, this thing influences other movies and TV shows too. Mission Impossible, the TV show, 1966 onward. And then movies, of course, Mission Impossible movies. They use brief missions to show Ethan Hunt's capabilities and so on. Lethal Weapon, Die Hard with Vengeance. They use the same structure to kickstart adrenaline before the central plotline. And many other movies. Bond ripples through non-Bond movies in big ways, always.
He does. But sometimes the pre-title sequence is connected directly to the main story. And actually, in the later James Bond movies, it really became important to setting up the plot points.
Mm-hmm.
So, for instance, if you look at the pre-title sequence in You'll Only Live Twice, the pre-title connected to the main story of James Bond having been killed. So he could basically be stealth for this mission because he was dead.
Yeah. Hey, another fake James Bond death. Look at the storytelling purpose there. It was to make a connection from an inspired pre-title to the actual full mission that James Bond would be on. This is different than what we saw in Goldfinger, like you said. And then let's look at the mini story in these movies that became not so mini as the series evolved them into more thematic or psychological openings. As an example, you look at The World Is Not Enough, 1999. This has a long 14-minute pre-title sequence where Bond chases an assassin across the Thames. Now, for the storytelling purpose here, you look at this, it introduces emotional stakes and themes of trust, of course, betrayal, that shape the entire movie, all in the pre-title. And this was the longest pre-title in any James Bond movie up to that point.
It kind of stretched the definition of a pre-title.
Yeah, I mean, this really was a mini movie. Yeah. And look at the influences. It certainly had influence on other action thrillers like The Bourne Ultimatum. Casino Royale adopted even longer pre-title sequences to set the tone and theme, not just the excitement. So it has lots of influence. Even Bond has influences on Bond later.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It made the title sequence itself part of the storytelling, right? So not the pre-title sequence, but it made the use of the pre-title sequence allowed the title sequence to become part of the storytelling itself. So we can GoldenEye as an example of this. The pre-title sequence starts with the dam jump, and the titles that follow depict the fall of Soviet symbols. So it's used to transition or time jump and conveys political change in the world. It's a really clever pre-title here.
Yeah.
They do that. And it also inspired integrating storytelling throughout the title design that we see in movies like Seven, Catch Me If You Can, and even Game of Thrones animated map introduction.
Yeah, it cemented the mini movie structure. It really did. And by the 1970s, every Bond movie pre-title sequence began with a short mission, success or failure. It contained its own beginning, middle, and end, and it transitioned seamlessly into the theme song, sometimes brilliantly, like Thunderball. That's one of my favorite transitions, where the water's shooting out of the Aston, and then it ripples into the title sequence with the water, because we know Thunderball is all about water. All right, and let's look at the influence. The self-contained opener became the narrative device used in The Bourne Identity, Raiders of the Lost Ark, Mission Impossible, all these movies, and virtually everything that comes after it. It's amazing the influence Bond has had in the filmmaking world because of the pre-title.
I agree with you there. So
Yeah.
the nice thing about this, we've mentioned some of the movies that Bond influenced here. So let's kind of talk about how these evolved and which movies they might have taken based on a James Bond movie. The James Bond pre-title sequence didn't just change action movies, it redefined the cinematic structure.
Yeah.
So, for example, the storytelling function of shocker, twist, cold open was first used in James Bond and From Russia with Love, but as we mentioned, Mission Impossible and Batman Begins takes that over. A character reintroduction in Goldfinger is where we first see this, and then it also influenced Indiana Jones and Bourne. The self-contained mini movie that you mentioned, The Spy Who Loved Me.
Yeah.
We also see that concept get into the Fast and Furious and John Wick. The story bridge or thematic setup that we see in For Your Eyes Only and GoldenEye, we also see in The Dark Knight and Casino Royale. And then there's also the concept of the emotional or psychological tone setting, and that's The World Is Not Enough in Skyfall, or even Spectre or Tenet. So there's a lot of influence as these pre-titles evolved and were matched to the movies they came out with in the Bond world, how they influenced either future Bond movies or non-Bond movies.
Yeah. The pre-title today has become a storytelling tool. Again, sets the tone and stakes instantly, hooks the audience before the slower exposition begins, and sometimes connects thematically to the main story later. For example, flash forwards, parallel events, character intros, and stuff like that. We talked about some of this. The James Bond franchise has had many impacts on spy movies and movies in general, from the pre-titles becoming a standard to character development, action, espionage, and more. It invented the spy movie franchise that so many other studios have tried to duplicate for decades now.
Right. And now Amazon has control. Let's
Yeah.
see if they further develop the franchise and continue going with the pre-title sequence.
All right. We've looked at the pre-title sequence history and the influence James Bond has had on it going forward. All right. That is a wrap. This has been Dan
And Tom.
of SpyMovieNavigator.com and our show Cracking the Code of Spy Movies, which we would love if you would subscribe to right now. That really helps us out a lot. Thanks for listening. We appreciate you spending time with us.